I'm a civil engineer, and I've had the good fortune of working with the Water Department and the Horticultural Society on some of these pilot projects. So I was just going to touch on some of the things we've learned and the things we're finding out as we try to implement these things. These are great national examples, but people always say, well, what, might work in Portland, what about Philly? Things that are a little bit different here, we have lots of little storms, but we do get gully washers and hurricanes. We have snow with gravel and debris. Things we need to think about are maintenance. Who's going to take care of what we design and build? There's safety issues. People genuinely worry about things like visibility and bad guys hiding in the bushes. So some sample projects where we've been learning some things. One of the first projects we worked on with the Water Department and the Horticultural Society was the Mill Creek Farm. And Joy Lawrence is going to talk a lot more about this project. But in terms of the engineering and the stormwater, we wanted to pick up the water that was coming down the street from about 2 blocks and capture an 1.5 inches off that street into the green space, which was, an empty lot where buildings had been demolished and the sidewalk needed to be replaced. We needed to keep that water shallow to get it into the soil. We couldn't go deep with pipes. So we came up with this inlet structure, which broke every rule in the code book. And the way we did it was we met with the maintenance guys from this Water Streets Department who are going to be taking care of that. And I can't emphasize enough the importance of listening to the people in the community and the people who are going to be taking care of things and hearing what they have to say about what can and can't work. So we put these street inlets that pick up the water that was coming down the street and causing flooding at the bottom. They're not connected to the storm sewer. Instead, these inlets fill up and overflow and infiltrate into these infiltration trenches that work something like this. They get the water off the street and spread it through level spreaders in the vegetated swale, and there's an infiltration bed and a berm. And there's a detail of the level spreader. What we learned here is we had to mortar the rocks because they're really handy for picking up and clunking people on the head or breaking a windshield, but those kinds of concerns are important in the urban environment. We used the inlets. We didn't use curb inlets because we didn't want a lot of trash to go in them. These still get trash and debris and take a good level of regular maintenance to keep them working. A little detail of just how the curb inlet worked. And that's what the garden looks like today, and Joy will tell you a lot more about the whole project. We took that same concept over to Waterview Recreation Center that was just built this year, where we wanted to pick up again the runoff off of a city street. And we had this idea, again, as Clark mentioned, who's walking on that 12-foot wide sidewalk? So we were going to have a 6-foot wide tree trench and a 6-foot wide porous concrete sidewalk that would take the water off the street into infiltration beds, and we'd use the water to infiltrate and water the trees. We thought we had it all figured out till we met with the rec department, and it turns out their maintenance guys couldn't cross the sidewalk to cut and mow the grass if the tree trenches were on the other side of the sidewalk. So we had to flip it. So the sidewalk's next to the street and the tree trenches are next to the rec center. We got it built, but these are the kinds of things that can kill a project if you're not listening to who's going to be there and taking care of it. Just our design, we thought we had it all figured out with these lovely beds under the sidewalk, not deep beds in front of the building where the utilities were running. And so we got out there and we hit rock where we were going to put our infiltration beds. We didn't want to dig up the sidewalk in the design process to see what was right under the sidewalk, and the first place the contractor put his bucket, he hit rock. So in the construction process, we had to adjust the design, put more stormwater in the other bed to accommodate it. These are the kinds of things that come up in construction. Other bumps, like our porous concrete, wasn't quite what we spec'd out. It works, but wasn't quite what we were looking for in appearance. So these are the kinds of things we're learning along the way as we try to get these projects actually implemented in Philly. Similar project that's not built yet, but it's under construction, is at the Bluebell Tavern, where water coming down Woodlawn Avenue is going to be taken into the green space at the park. Here we've had some challenges, a lot of dirty water coming down the street. You can see that curb inlet. As well as how do we get that water as it's coming down the street, and I don't have a pointer here, to the inlet and across the street and into the park. So here we're using trench drains, very shallow, because if that water goes deep, we won't be able to get it into the surface of the park. And the idea that the trench drain will pick up the water, take it across the sidewalk through a trench drain, and into bioretention systems that are just going to be planted in grass in this park. that'll take the water, and there's also some curb cuts that'll disperse the water. The whole system has to be able to take the small storms into the park, but allow the larger storms to continue down the curb and into those inlets so we don't overload the system when we get those heavy rainfalls. And that's the bluebell. Thank God my animation worked. Passyunk Avenue, another one under design. And here there was an opportunity the water department had as the streets department was widening and improving Passyunk Avenue, and some of the pavement at these intersections was going to be going away. So they said, could we put little bioretention in there as lanes are literally eliminated? This is a challenging area. It's got the refineries. We're right next to used car dealers and adult entertainment facilities. It's a challenging place. But again, the idea, could we take that water into green spaces that improve the water quality, improve the aesthetics of the area, even in such a challenging setting? Again, these ideas that we're having to look at different engineering techniques that haven't been the standard in terms of trenches across sidewalks and along streets that aren't always in the book of standard design things. And I'll just leave you with an example. Glenn asked me to touch on a suburban example. This was a project I worked on at Cahill out near Hershey, PA, and this was a new development of high-density residential townhouses, singles, and it had originally had a very conventional stormwater design with detention basins. It was in a limestone area with sinkholes. That's what the red dots are. It's usually not a good idea to build a road on top of a sinkhole, but that was the plan. So we said, can you take a low-impact development approach? What was interesting about this project is so much of the water was coming off of the streets, and the streetscape became the real workhorse for stormwater. And much of that water was managed in a green system of porous sidewalks, vegetated swales, and infiltration beds under the system. Raised curbs on the busier streets, depressed curbs on the quieter residential streets. They look like that going in for construction. These infiltrate the small storms, they manage the peak of the large storms, and they look extremely conventional at the end of the day. And you can see how big the township ordinance required the road to be, which was part of our problem, but there you have it. But this is the stormwater system at work in a very suburban. What I liked is we put rain gardens out front of the singles, and all the roof water goes into these rain gardens, so every house has its own little system. And they were out front in the right-of-way so that the township could see them, maintain them, get to them. You couldn't get rid of them without somebody noticing that. But coming back to the site a couple years later, they looked kind of barren when they were first planted, and people put pink flamingos and things in them. But as you come back later, a few years later, they've grown in, and there's a real difference in the suburban environment driving down the street from the first phase of the development with conventional lawns to the areas that have these beautiful, lush rain gardens out front of them. So I will leave you with that image, and thank you.